Tom, thanks for joining us.
Absolutely.
Here in New Mexico, MALDEF has been involved in the Yazzie case. Explain what's important about this case and what did a judge say New Mexico must do?
So we call it the Martinez case because it's the unification of two different cases. And the judge, after a lengthy trial, concluded, first of all, that New Mexico state constitution guarantees an adequate and equitable education to all students. And second, that the state was not adequately investing or monitoring what was going on in public education to ensure that those constitutional mandates were being met. And then appropriately, the judge permitted the state to come forward with the first attempt at resolving those issues.
And what should educational funding equity look like in New Mexico, and how has the state done so far?
Well, we're in the remedial phase now with a new judge, which presents some challenges, but we will be exploring whether what the state has put in place is adequate to address the deficiencies. I think there's some questions about that in any large system. Adding more resources doesn't solve the problem by itself. You've got to be very careful about putting in place good monitoring and intervention mechanisms. You've got to make sure that the resources are adequate and that they're being used in the most effective way to address the education gaps that we continue to see for Latino students, for Native American students, for English learners, for special education students. So we've still got a lot of work to do in this case, even as the state has responded to the court ruling.
Could we see similar challenges in other states?
So we actually have seen similar challenges like this in all the states around this one, and we'll continue to see them. Now, they're imperfect because we are required to proceed under state law, state constitutions, in front of state court judges. And that's all as a result of a decision from the U.S. Supreme Court in the early 1970s coming out of Texas, where the court concluded by a bare majority that education is not a fundamental right under our U.S. Constitution. And that means that we have to rely on the states and their constitutions to establish the right to an adequate and equitable education and then to define the parameters of that right.
It's been more than 50 years since the founding of MALDEF, and throughout the group's history we've seen successful cases around voting rights, new districts. How has MALDEF changed in these 5 decades?
Well, it's interesting. We've just finished up some commemorative events of our 50th anniversary. And the folks who have been around the longest in the early years of the organization, to a person, when we heard from them, they both celebrated the 50 years but recognized that they had expected there would be a diminished need for MALDEF 50 years after it began. But their conclusion was that in 2018, 2019, MALDEF and its mission are as much needed as ever. And that's entirely a result of the current national atmosphere that we face with the most anti-Latino, Latino-phobic presidential administration in our history.
And for decades, we've seen no movement in Congress on immigration reform, but we've seen a lot of prosecutorial discretion and administrative moves from the Obama and Trump administrations. How challenging has this been to MALDEF to kind of monitor this moving goal line?
Well, certainly it's been challenging under the Trump administration to see the diminution in the rights of all non-citizens, including not just those who are approaching the border for the first time, but those who have been here for decades, and many of them, as you know, who came as minors and have contributed and continue to contribute to our economy, as well as those who are lawful permanent residents. We've seen a disrespect for all non-citizens from this administration that has been very troubling. And it's manifested in policies that have been challenged in court. Some of them we've challenged in court, and we continue to have to do that.
Now, of course, President Obama, when he was in office, was called the deporter-in-chief, and some critics have said his aggressive immigration reforms set up some of the Trump administration policies on immigration. Now, looking back, did Latino civil rights groups, including MALDEF, did they speak out enough against some of Obama's policies?
So I certainly know that MALDEF did. We did speak out against the policies that were resulting in all of these deportations, particularly deportations that did not coincide with the articulated enforcement priorities of the administration, where people who had no significant criminal record whatsoever were being put into removal and removed from the country as a result of programs like Secure Communities that we denounced together with many others. But I would say that there were differences across the board. There are some advocacy groups who clearly saw their role as making sure that the administration under President Obama had support from the outside. MALDEF's philosophy has always been, no matter who's in office, we are critics. We are critical friends with those who are friendly, but still need some criticism to shape better policies. And with administrations like the one we currently face, we're clearly an ongoing adversary, and we've got to take on that mantle and pursue the cases and the policy efforts to turn around what we're seeing, which is a tremendous disrespect for the Latino community, an attempt to really diminish and even exclude the Latino community's participation and central importance in governance of this country. We have an even greater burden under administrations like the Trump administration.
No, of course, Mexican Americans continue to struggle with poverty compared to other ethnic groups. Here in New Mexico, we're one of the poorest states in the nation and the most Hispanic. What could be done in the courts to battle poverty outside of education?
So first, MALDEF has never been an organization from its very beginning that has believed the courts are the solution, the sole solution to any problem, particularly complex problems like this one. It's got to be court action together with community organizing, civic engagement, getting out the vote, really working on all angles to address complicated issues. I would say an area where the courts can participate in being a part of the solution is in education. Cases like Martinez-Yazzie, where we're trying to ensure that opportunities are increased, particularly for those from impoverished backgrounds, where the education system becomes what in principle it has always been, the great equalizer, giving everyone the opportunity to take their skills and abilities and maximize their potential and their achievements. We haven't seen that principle play out, in fact, in our education system really ever. So we've got to make efforts that include the courts to try to make education that great equalizer that it should be.
Of course, we have Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor. She made history becoming the first Latina on the nation's highest court, Latino in general. She's Puerto Rican. Mexican Americans are still the largest Latino ethnic group in the United States. What's it going to take to get a Mexican American on the Supreme Court?
I think we've got to ensure that what we face today is pushed back, and I think we will prevail. This effort by the Trump administration to diminish, if not eliminate, the Latino role in civic society. And one manifestation of that is that this administration, until about 2 weeks ago, despite a record-breaking set of judicial nominations, had not nominated a single Latino or Latina to any court of appeals in this country. Now, that's the second layer of courts just below the Supreme Court. That is unprecedented going back decades. The first Latina who he nominated to a court of appeals is a Cuban American in Florida to the 11th Circuit. But the result of not making any nominations to that important court of appeals level is that the 5th Circuit, neighboring New Mexico, covering Texas, Louisiana, and Mississippi, Texas the dominant state in that circuit, today the 5th Circuit has not a single Latino or Latina judge in active duty in that circuit that serves the state of Texas. Again, you would have to go back decades to find that. So it's that kind of effort, together with the things we've seen about discounting, undercounting, excluding Latinos, including adding a late citizenship question to Census 2020, fortunately now removed as a result of court action. But it's that kind of activity that we've got to push back on, and we push back by becoming involved. I think we saw in the November 2018 midterm elections unprecedented levels of Latino participation. I think we'll see more of that. We've got to see more of that to end up in a position where we will get Mexican American and broader Latino representation in all of the institutions of authority and power in this country, including the Supreme Court.
Now, when MALDEF was founded in 1968, we still only had a handful of lawyers in Texas, California, and New Mexico. Since then, the numbers have grown, but how do we see parity in the state legal system with Hispanic attorneys? We're talking about, you mentioned the federal level, but also statewide judges.
No, we still see underrepresentation and under-inclusion in corridors of power and authority across the country. You name the industry, including the judicial system, including the legal system. We still got lots of work to do to ensure that our numbers are represented more fairly, more equitably in positions of authority across the country.
And how did you get involved? Why did you pick the field of legal?
I went to law school to do this work, to have the opportunity to engage in civil rights and trying to ensure that our Latino community continues to advance. And it's been my great honor to lead MALDEF for 10 years. And I've got a terrific set of attorneys, most of them Latino, Latina attorneys who are doing great work to ensure that we are promoting the civil rights of all Latinos living in the United States. But given the growth and importance of the Latino community, that means we're an important part of preserving the constitutional rights of every person in this country.
What civil rights lawyers did you look up to when you were studying law school?
So when I was growing up, before law school, I didn't really know any lawyers. I think I met one who was on the school board in my local school district. I didn't really get to know about lawyers in the Latino community until I was in college and had the great opportunity of being introduced to Vilma Martinez, who was one of the presidents of MALDEF in its early years from 1973 to 1982. And I have spent many, many hours over the years talking with Vilma and getting her advice, not only about my civil rights career, but about anything you can think of. And she's been a great mentor. But prior to that, really, my exposure to civil rights and civil rights law was through reading about the African American community and some of the pioneers there, Thurgood Marshall included. Only later in law school, college and law school, doing research on my own, because it's not in the textbooks, or at least then it wasn't, you would learn about these equally important Latino cases. Hernandez versus Texas, decided the very same year as Brown versus Board of Education. In fact, the same month, by a unanimous court, again with an opinion like Brown, written by Chief Justice Warren, like the case of Mendez versus Westminster School District in California, a segregation case that was a precursor to what would go to the Supreme Court from the South in Brown versus Board of Education. I didn't really learn about those cases until doing my own research in college. This was back in the 1980s, because back then we didn't have textbooks that covered these issues. We're making progress on that, but we need to do more to ensure that we are really taking hold of our history, sharing our history, and making sure that our embrace of our history is something that empowers us to do more in the future to secure our equitable representation in power in this country.
Why don't we know more about the attorneys like John J. Herrera and Gus Garcia who were in that Hernandez case?
We've got to be advocates for ensuring that our story is a part of the textbooks, is a part of the history of civil rights, a part of the history of the Constitution as it has developed over the course of this country's lifetime. We've got to ensure that that's included in textbooks, and we've got to demand that as the largest minority group in the country, our story is an integral part of the American story, and it has to be a part of that and respected as that.
Should we have a national museum on Latino history?
I absolutely believe we should have a national Latino museum. I think there are efforts to do that. I know there are efforts to do that today, but we have been the largest minority group in the country for over a decade. We are now 1 in 4 public school students from kindergarten through 12th grade nationwide, and that proportion is only growing. In that context, there is no excuse for not having a national Latino museum.
Okay, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.